Here we go. Catherine?
So when you were talking about being, leaving Europe and being in Brazil, and you were telling us the facts of the matter, how did you both experience it? Were you aware that there was danger or trouble, or were you kids and it didn't really kind of register? What was your experience of that?
What would you say?
Well, first of all, in Rio de Janeiro, I was much younger, so I was maybe 6 by that point. And after we'd been in Itapapuena, when we came back to Rio, I started the first symptoms of malaria and typhoid fever. So a lot of the time I wasn't well. My father was giving me injections of various things. So that sort of colored it. I did remember, I think, going to the movies and seeing Shirley Temple, which was a high point. I do remember slightly going to a nun's school, and I remember the beach, but I remember the boarding house we've been living in, I think, but that was before we came back from Barra. I don't know where we lived after we came back.
Yeah,
I don't remember that,
yeah,
I have no memories of that.
Yeah. Just the last one I remember is the boarding house on
Yeah, when my mother lost her wedding ring,
Papadimitriou.
and she couldn't find her wedding ring, I already got one. Couldn't find her wedding ring, and then finally found it. We had what we call a waschlappen, which is a face cloth, but it was made like a glove, and her ring was inside, and had slipped off. That was fortunate.
I wanted to know, when you first got to New York,
Wait a second, Tina, I
Sorry.
wanted to hear Dad's answer to how he experienced it.
Well, I think, we knew we were in a strange place. I don't think we sensed danger, and we kept being moved around, so I don't have a memory of it, but thinking back on it, I can imagine that there was a certain element of, uncertainty. Kids are very resilient, and so you can bounce around a lot, but, there we were in a couple of different places. I went to one school, then we moved to this place in the country, and my mother said that, when we moved there, they had the hope or expectation that we would stay there for a long time. That would be sort
In
of,
Barra?
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
I didn't.
her sense was, maybe that's my father was telling you, now we're gonna be here, let's not worry about what else we're gonna do, we're gonna stay here. So fine, you just kind of settle in, and I do remember having a fight with one kid who attacked me or taunted me or something, and attacking him, and finally I realized I was really very angry, and I could hurt him, and stopped. And I told that story to somebody recently. They said, well, that you may have been aware in the back of your mind that if you did something wrong, your family could be in danger. Well, that's a double projection. I don't remember that, but I do remember being really, really angry with the kid and having, knocking him down and belting him, and then realizing as I was belting him that, I could do damage and I better stop. But, so you were being bounced around in some way. You were trying to find bearings. I don't remember having any friends in Barra. Elizabeth had a lot of young girls, young women who loved to play with her because here was this little blonde girl, in a country where everybody else had black curly hair. So she was really something quite different. But I don't remember any boys my age that I played with. We have no memory of it. There must have been some, but no memory of that. then I don't remember, like Elizabeth, I don't remember when we went back to Rio, how long we were
Yeah.
in Rio and where we stayed.
I don't remember the apartment at all.
No, I think you're right. I think what happened was we went from the boarding house. We lived in a boarding house
Yeah,
where there were, the sleeping rooms were here, and then you walk a block or so to the place where they had the food, where you were served the food. So I don't think we had a kitchen. If we had a kitchen, it was a you know, a little kitchenette. And then we got to the States, and I'll remember the States, but Elizabeth does too, I'm sure.
So your experience, you don't, I mean, it's actually kind of amazing that with all that change and trauma, you had a real, you know, that wasn't your experience per se. I know you were both young, but you were in the middle of a lot of changes that were fairly
Yeah.
intense for your
Well,
mother
I'm
and
sure we
father.
knew it in some way, but you know, like kids, they say you tend to.
Yeah.
I somehow inside me, I don't think I felt I was there to stay.
Mhm. Mhm. And was grandma or grandpa particularly anxious, or did they manage to keep themselves on the level, or your
I
experience in
think
that?
they really shielded us from,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know, what must have been troubling them all the time.
Mhm.
You know, they didn't say to us, oh my God, you know,
Mhm.
any time now the police could come.
Well, some families do say that, you know.
Yeah, I
Their
mean,
kids are in that.
I mean, my mother said that, at least in, most of what I remember is not what I remember, but what I read and what she wrote.
Yeah.
But the one thing she said was whenever these strange horsemen appeared,
Mhm.
because most people came by horse, she would look to see if it looked like a policeman or not. And so they always worried that some policeman was coming for them to take them away. So that concern always sort of hung there in the back, particularly for my mother. I think it was more of a worrier than my father. I think he, you know, I'm sure he also worried, but he was more focused on what he had to do. I'm sure she was also. And then we came to New York, and we were told about New York. We were met by the Catholic service, whatever it was, some group, and they found us an apartment on East 85th Street. It was a one-room studio, 5th floor walk-up, and there I remember befriending a boy who lived around the corner and playing with him. And I went to school at the public school. I think I entered the 4th grade there. We arrived in April, and so I went to school because school was in session.
Did you speak
And,
English?
Yeah, that's fine.
Did you speak English?
Not
Well,
really.
you don't
My mother had
pronounce
taught us, you know,
on
coming up on the
the
boat,
boat.
she taught us, you know, Paul sees the coat, you know, Paul chases the dog, you know.
I can't remember the name of the girl, there was a girl and a boy in the
Yeah.
book.
So,
And then I started school,
We were in
And-
Brazil, let's see, we arrived
2.5.
in
2.5 years.
January of '39.
And
We left Budapest, I think, in December of '38,
yeah.
or the beginning of '39, a couple of weeks to get to Brazil. And we left Brazil in April of '41, so 2 years and
Yeah.
3 months, something like that.
But I started school, when we came to New York, and I immediately became very ill again with malaria. So the truant officer would come to check I was still there. And my father at that point I think he finally got an internship at was it Misericordia?
Misericordia.
And my mother was giving lessons, so I was alone in this big room. I remember on a double bed, we had 2 double beds, I think. And my brother was sent off finally to boarding school,
Yeah.
where he was miserable because he didn't speak the language very well, and he was very far away, Lake Placid.
Yeah.
Really far.
So, and I was the lucky one, I stayed home. I stayed home in bed. And then we moved moved to the Bronx. And we had a small apartment, I think only one bedroom again.
Yeah, one bedroom apartment, and in the main room, there was a kitchenette and a sort of a dining, living area, and then a double bed that you slept in, that I slept in when I came back from school. And what happened was I finished those last couple of months of the fourth grade, and the story was that, you know, the first day I was there, I was crying, and they called my mother, and she came and said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well, you know, in Brazil, I had a really good-looking teacher, and this teacher looks like spit-up applesauce." So I said, "No, you have to stay." So I stayed. It's like Christopher saying, "I have a dental appointment, I have to leave."
I have an ugly teacher, I gotta go.
I have an ugly teacher, I want to leave. So we were there. Then in the summer, of course, we were in Manhattan in the hot summer, but there was a Swiss family, the Frönicas,
Yeah,
whose husband, the father, was a chemist with a Swiss company and had been involved in the discovery of DDT. So they were quite well-to-do. By our standards, they were wealthy. And they had a home in Ridgewood, and sometimes we were invited out
Yeah.
to spend the day there. And then they had a cabin on Lake Sparta, which is a lake, maybe the back half of this bay, size of the lake, and they had a kind of a log cabin or something on the lake, and they would invite people like Elizabeth and me, other sort of refugee children, to spend a week or some time with them, and I remember that. And I remember the most impressive was that they would tell stories or read stories about Swiss heroes. And there was one Swiss hero, maybe it was William Tell, besides shooting the apple off the kid's head, the other thing, maybe it was someone besides, but they were having a fight with the enemy, and the enemy was coming with lances, and this guy reached out and he took a bunch of the lances and pulled them into his body so that would break the line and the other guys could go through. And so that was very heroic, and I thought to myself, is this really what you have to do? It's really kind of daunting, so I'm not sure I wanted to do that. And then in the fall, in September, my father took me by train 8 hours north to Plattsburgh. And there was this school run by Christian brothers, and he said, "This is where you're going to go." Okay. So I was up there for 2 years, and there were some people, they were very nice. I remember one brother was very friendly, and there was a little professor of music, Professor Merliani, and he, I guess somebody said that, the family plays music, so he got me a clarinet, and they got me outfitted, and, I was trying to play. I had no idea what I was doing. We were marching in the little band as we marched through the streets of Plattsburgh on, Columbus Day, whatever it was, Veterans Day. So, and then the big event was on Saturday, you went to this window with, what do you call that cloudy window?
Frosted glass.
What?
Frosted glass.
Frosted glass window, and you stood there, and something opened, and a hand came out, and it gave you a quarter. And so then
That's a lot, actually.
the quarter let you go downtown and go to the movies.
Nice.
So that was a big deal. It was about a 4-block walk downtown to the movies. So Saturday we went to the movies. I can't remember whether you could buy something to eat besides going to the movies, but that was the big event. And then back to the school, and we slept in a dorm room, probably 40 beds, white steel beds, And there were a lot of kids crying at night, because this was a school for kids whose parents, you know, couldn't handle them at home for one reason or another. And some of them had stories about there'd been a crash, I had no idea what they were talking about, and people had jumped out of windows and killed themselves. This was 1941. And before the war. I guess the war started while we were there in December. And the other thing was there were also day students from the surrounding, from Plattsburgh, and one of them lived right across the street from the school, and his family ran the local bakery, Duryea, and in the spring, we would have a Frankfurter roast out on, they took us to the lake, we were near Lake Champlain, and we would have hot dogs on Duryea buns. That was a big deal. One of those memorable occasions. And there was next to the school, there was some ball field. I mean, there was a ball field on one side, a flat field which was iced over sort of in October, because it got cold enough in October that they could freeze. And then there was skating until April. I mean, they were skating all the time. And Elizabeth, you know, talked about skating. We had learned how to skate in Vienna, and so I skated. And then I got to play hockey. I remember, I don't think I played it too long, because I remember one time skating down towards the other goal, and somebody tripped me, and I fell down, and I had the wind knocked out of me. I've never had the wind knocked out of me. I thought I was dying. I thought this was all over. Finally got up. But I do remember playing with, you know, with kids and playing Ringo Levio and other stuff. So there, you know, there was a certain amount of fun there.
How often did you go home?
I think I got to go home probably Christmas time. Yeah.
And the summer.
Yeah, Christmas time, the summer then, you know, we were there. Elizabeth would be, by then she said we'd moved up to Hull Avenue, 3349 Hull Avenue, which was up right near Gun Hill Road. And we had a two-room apartment. Grandpa and Grandma had a bedroom, and then there was this sitting room with a little kitchenette. And the big treat was, and I don't know if we had it every day, but the good humor man would come, and Grandma would buy a black raspberry pop, because she was a big fan of black raspberry. So did the black raspberry, take it into the house and cut it into 3 pieces, so we each got a piece of it.
But my father was first an internship and then residency, so he wasn't living in the house that much, and John was away. And I remember that first he was very, very unhappy, and just when he started being happy, then they could afford to have him at home again. So he came back. But I remember once he came back with a little glass, and I can still remember that, with on the outside applicated like oranges with green leaves. And I thought, I really thought that was wonderful that my brother brought me a present.
Good for me.
Was it for you?
It was for me.
Oh, nice.
And in the meantime, you were in New York, were you, like, what percentage of the time were you able to get out of bed and go to school?
Well, by the time I got to the Bronx, I was better, and I started school, and a nun's school. And I remember I said something once, not speaking English very well, and the nuns told me that I was a very bold girl. And I had no idea what bold meant, and it was awful. And I also remember I started having your problems of cold hands and feet, and they were putting my hands under ice cold water, and anyway. When you ask, you know, was it happy? It wasn't an unhappy childhood, except that I was ill a lot of the time. But I made some good friends there. The Deschamps twins. No, that was 115 already.
Yeah, that was very Nate Night Street.
There were some friends, I think, on the other side of the building that I used to run across and see in their apartment when we were in the Bronx.
Did you guys then have, you had a visa to come
What?
in? You had a visa to be in the States?
No, we had that letter from the consul,
Yeah, we got
the letter from
We
the
had
consul.
permission to come into the United States, and then my parents, took the process to become citizens,
Mhm.
which was a 5-year process.
Okay.
At least we were there, we were in the country legally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But did you arrive like everyone else to the
Through
Empire
Ellis
State
Island?
Building, the Statue of Liberty, or?
Well, we came in, my mother's stories, and we came in by ship, and so you sail by the Statue of Liberty, and my mother says that as they sailed by the Statue of Liberty, my father stopped worrying, and my mother started worrying. But that he felt finally he was someplace where he didn't have to keep running.
Mm.
Although he had to work, to become, in those days, being an intern, they accepted his European degree, so his college degree and his medical school degree, but they didn't accept, the fact that he'd been a doctor for 20+ years. And so he had to pass the equivalent of the bar exam, the medical exam, which some of his friends had a lot of trouble with because their English wasn't that good. These were people for whom English was not a first language, and secondly, wasn't a language they'd been speaking for a while, and now they were being tested, at a professional level, professional terms. But he passed that, and then once you had passed that test, you then had to go through the internship and the residence, and they would pay, basically a bare bones
And
fee
he
and
was-
required
He
to
was
sleep
getting
in the
$20
hospital,
a month, $20 a month.
something, so that he could barely pay rent. I don't know quite how they managed to pay rent and feed, and grandma was busy giving lessons on piano or English, whatever she could do to earn some more money. And I think that's one reason why they sent me away, that there was
You got a
a
scholarship.
group of Christian brothers who said, yeah, we'll take, refugee children, and we'll take them, we'll take care of them. So they didn't have the burden of feeding me. Anyway, and then 2 years later, and my mother said it was prompted in part, I'm sure it wasn't the only reason, that when I came home on one of my last trips back from Plattsburgh, she said something to me, and I said, something like, "Yes, ma'am." With some very formal expression, like, "Mother? What mother?" "Yes, ma'am." So she was very upset by that. And I did in all innocence. And then, by then, my father had gone through the couple of years of whatever he had to go through, and he was then allowed to practice, or at least he had enough income that we could move down to the apartment on 89th Street, where we were then from 1943. And both Elizabeth and I then went to a Catholic school on 84th Street, St. Ignatius, grade school. And there, finally we had a more settled kind of life. We were then there for, indefinitely.
Did you have the experience, Dad, during that time of any kind of prejudice? I mean, we were at war now with Germany, as you were entering high school.
The neighborhood we were in was basically a German
It was
neighborhood.
a German neighborhood.
I know, but when you were out in your school and you didn't have that
No,
experience.
people knew that we were refugees, so if it came up,
Mhm.
nobody talked about it.
Mhm.
The only thing that happened to me, which I found incredible, is when the war ended, we were in class, and this nun, who I decided must have been really not extremely intelligent, got up and asked us, anyone whose family was involved during the war, to get up and tell the story of what they had done, you know, brave during the war. And she called on me. And I got up and started talking about an uncle in the army, and I suddenly realized he was on the other side. And I remember that horror of, you know, wanting to escape, sit down, disappear. And afterwards I thought, how, you know, could she really have been that stupid not to realize, you know, who I was? But she had done some pretty nasty things to some of the other students. So.
I do remember when we were in that apartment when the war was going on, that my mother was busy sending packages to Europe.
Yeah.
So sending packages both to, I guess, to Hungary and to Austria. And so-called care packages could go through. I mean, even though we're in war with those people, you could send care packages through. And my closest cousin in Vienna, the one that, you know, I'd sort of grown up with, Hans Huber, saying, oh boy, you know, when these packages came, things came that they'd never seen before, like marshmallows.
Yes.
No idea marshmallows.
Did you know the end of that story?
Yeah.
They wrote back and they said, could you please send us some more swamp birds? Swamp birds? What did I say? Marsh swallows. It took us the longest time. And then the other thing, Mother used to, instead of just putting paper around the packages, she'd put material and sewed it so that, you know, it wouldn't open and that nobody would break into them. And when they went back to visit the family in Budapest at one point, they had used that fabric to make curtains and to separate, I think, the two sections of the room. But the marsh swallows, I love.
It's 5:20.
Should we take a break? You want to keep going?
Okay, 5:20, and we'll continue another time.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Very good, thank